Hey, we're at the DC Comics booth at San Diego Comic-Con talking to Gary Phillips about the new Vigilante series. So for those who might not know, can you describe what the series is and how it actually came about?
All right, so in a nutshell, the series takes place in a place where you don't normally see in comics in the Southland of the greater Los Angeles area, so that's Southeast LA. And essentially it came about over a period of time of me and Dan Didio talking about some different ideas. I was going to revive, at one point I was going to revive The Question, then I was going to revive this other character, and those kind of fell by the wayside for various reasons. And then we got to the Vigilante, and it seemed like a great fit for what I wanted to do in terms of telling this sort of crime fiction story in the Southland.
So, I mean, from the work that I know of yours, it's a lot of crime fiction, a lot of noir, that type of story. What is it about that genre that really interests you?
Well, the purists will tell you that noir is about doomed characters on a doomed path. I like to think that Donnie Fairchild, our current embodiment of the Vigilante, is not necessarily on a doomed path, but he is on an interesting journey. He's going to take this journey from being a kind of guy, easygoing kind of guy, not really involved in anything, and now because of what happens, he finds himself pulled into this whole new world. So for him, it is more about finding about this underbelly and this journey through a part of Los Angeles and the greater environs that he had no knowledge of, and that's what's going to become apparent as he tries to solve who it is that killed his girlfriend.
So, I mean, Donnie is a new iteration of the character. Why were you going with a new version of him as opposed to maybe one of the other classic versions? It is a character who's had many different identities under the mask.
Exactly. Well, I think you raised an interesting question, Brett. I mean, I think that question itself suggests that it's really the mantle of Vigilante itself that has is kind of this totem that kind of has this power. So from Greg Saunders, as we know from the original Vigilante, this sort of modern cowboy in the 40s, to Adrian Chase, to even I think there was a couple of other versions of the Adrian Chase version in the 80s and early 90s. And so it just seemed like a natural fit then that, as I said, as we talked about the different ways in which to get into this story, it seemed like somebody taking up the mantle of the Vigilante seemed like a natural fit. And the fact is that there are, in the context of this 6-issue miniseries, there are some tropes, there are some nods to Greg Saunders in the past and the Adrian Chase character as well.
So the Vigilante character has got a hell of a history. I mean, it actually predates Superman of being a live-action character. As a writer, how much have you gone through that back history, and how much is that on your mind coming up with everything?
Well, I'm very familiar with, oddly enough, I guess through reprints and just having a sense of the character from the 40s, and even that version of the 40s, we know, got reiterated several different times. And so I had a working knowledge of that, as well as, of course, I have, I guess, somewhere in my unorganized collection, some of the Wolfman, Adrian Chase versions of the character. And so, to that extent, it was on my mind. I did, though, as I said, there are a few visual cues for the sharp reader to notice in the series, and so some of that will come through, as well as I think some of the storyline of who this Vigilante character is. Not just the fact that he rides a motorcycle, he does. It happens to be a nice cherry old school motorcycle, but there are some other nods in terms of the content of who this character is and those older versions of the Vigilante.
I mean, you said that one of the big things is it is in a new location, an area we don't see a whole lot in comics. What is it about that area in particular that you're mining and you're going to use and discuss in the series?
Right. Well, I think because people haven't, people have if you tell people, if you say New York, people instantly have an image of New York, even if they've never even been there, right, from films and TV. If you tell them Los Angeles, they do have an image of Los Angeles, although it tends to be just the palm trees and Beverly Hills and the sort of the Tony areas of town. As we know from people who've grown up in the Southland, there's a lot more to it than that. And so, because I am a crime fiction author, and because I have a background as somebody who's, I wouldn't say versed, but at least like an anthropologist, I try to dig through the various enclaves of the vast Southland. So hopefully I bring all that to the table when I set out to write this version of the Vigilante, so that we would go to areas like Cudahy and Compton and Southgate, places that people don't even know exist, let alone what goes on in those areas, and try to present those kind of areas of town that are more working class and more hard scrabble, and quite frankly more fit to the kind of vibe that I wanted to come across in the story.
So when I think of those areas, I'm thinking very socio-political, economic thoughts about them, especially when you think of the glitz and glitter of LA. Is that something you're going to be exploring in the series?
Yeah, I think to some extent, Brett. But I mean, listen, the idea. I'm still an entertainer. My job is my job is to not hit you over the head with these great socio-political messages. That's there, but it's a kind of subtext to it. It's a kind of sub-theme to it. I mean, it's what I think is going to be exciting. It's a great story. It's a classic comic book story. A young man's girlfriend is murdered or dies under mysterious circumstances. As I said, when we first present him, he's kind of the slacker kind of guy. He's b-balling on the neighborhood courts. He's got his medical marijuana card. He's a maintenance man at the local university. Life is good, right? It's just this easy going. This thing happens to his girlfriend, and he's got two choices. Do I ignore it and walk away, or do I step up? And of course, he's got to step up. And once he steps up, well, you can't do it half-assed. You got to go all the way. And so I think that's going to be the exciting and the entertaining part of the story.
You've written a lot of prose on top of, along with comics. As a writer, what's the difference between the two? I mean, obviously, the visual is a big part of it. But, I mean, for you as a writer, do you approach it different? Do you think through the story a bit different?
That's a very good point. You're right. I mean, listen, comics is a visual medium. Comics is all about the artist. And so my job as much as possible is not to have my words get in the way of the art. I guess that's really the number one concern. And two, I think like writing a comic script in some ways is like a film or TV script in the sense that it's all about the shorthand. It's all about what do I do, one, to communicate to the artist what goes in this particular panel, so it's not cluttered, but it's clear to the reader and the viewer what it is. But it's also about how am I moving the story forward, both visually as well as in the words I want to give into my characters' mouths to help move things along, but not so much that I'm overburdening with exposition or over-explaining things. No, comics have got to move. There's a pace to comics, as we know. And so you've got to be aware of that pace to satisfy the reader and to keep them engaged, but also at the same time, hopefully deliver some of that story. So I think about that a lot in terms of that kind of balance. And it really helps that I've had a great editor on the book, Jamie Rich, who I've known Jamie from before, and Jamie himself is a writer. And so, all these are great elements. Elena Casagrande is the artist. So all these are elements that have to work together to make a great comic.
So final question, to you personally, who is the Vigilante?
The Vigilante is, to me, in some ways, a character very much of his time. He is a young man who is not so much a political young man as we talked about. These social political events are happening around him, and he's not really part of that. I mean, he's aware of that, and he knows these things exist, and it's not as if he's all of a sudden going to pick up this mantle and go on this crusade. So for him, it's really more this personal journey, what happens to his girlfriend and what he's going to do about it. But he also, part of that journey is going to be becoming more aware and more clear on the surroundings, and that his actions will have reactions. And what does that mean down the line?
Thank you very much for talking to us, and appreciate it.